2 years to the very day of his father's arrest. Mark Madoff was not facing any criminal charges, at least not yet, but he and his younger brother are the subjects of many a lawsuit. So what does this mean in all of the legal turmoil that still is yet to unfold? Let's bring in our legal panel, defense attorney David Wolf, former prosecutor, and current defense attorney Joey Jackson. Joey, you know, Mark Madoff had lost his wife, his money, his property, his once prominent family name, and his ability to be employed. He was jobless. Plus, he was being sued by everybody under the sun for millions of dollars, angry investors, the trustee, not to mention the pending federal criminal investigation. So I suppose it can be said that Bernie Madoff not only ruined livelihoods, but he claimed lives, even his own son. Is that the backdrop behind today's tragedy?
I got to tell you, Greg, you're right on point here. And listen, I'm not one that's an advocate for allowing the son to be held accountable for the sins of the father, but I am one who's an advocate to say they should be investigated to see if there is any sin there. And I think certainly there's a limited ability for him to live. What do you have to look forward to? You have $1 billion lawsuit that you're facing because you've defrauded investors, and where there's smoke, there's fire. You have a wife that leaves you. You have, as you mentioned, Greg, you can't find a job in the investment business, and as a result of that, the pressures got to him. Now, his attorney came out and made a statement, if you saw it, of course you did, and he indicated that, look, he is the subject of innuendo, and he just couldn't take the pressures, and he's an innocent party here. Well, unfortunately, we don't know whether he's an innocent party or not. It's a tragedy that he's dead, but I think we're going to learn less given the fact that he's dead now.
All right, David, does Mark Madoff's suicide have any impact on the various lawsuits against him, the pending investigations and so forth? Will, for example, it now be easier or harder or make no difference at all for litigants to obtain some of the privileged or protected documents that could prove incriminating?
Yeah, Greg, the lawsuits will remain. His assets will be frozen. The family members are still subject to the lawsuits as well. No, absolutely not. And the tragic thing also is that 2-year-old son who was found in his home when he was found hanging is now by default subject to the lawsuit, a 2-year-old. And no, the attorney-client privilege, which existed, which made it very difficult for the feds and for plaintiffs' counsel to get a hold of documents, correspondence between Madoff and his lawyer, still exists. The Supreme Court decided 12 years ago that the death of a client does not have any effect on that attorney-client privilege.
Right. And only the client can waive the privilege, not the attorney. Joey,
right.
Tonight at midnight, as you know, the 2-year statute of limitations runs on the civil lawsuits that the court-appointed trustee can file. And just in the last week alone, my goodness, Irving Picard has filed a flurry of big ones. And what sticks out to me are all the big financial institutions that are now defendants: J.P. Morgan Chase, UBS, the Swiss Bank, and HSBC. I mean, all of these are deep pockets. Will those banks now try to settle for big bucks to try to make all of this just go away? They don't want to face exposure here.
No, they don't. But here's the problem with that, Greg. The first problem is that, listen, banking institutions cannot be said to have known that this was occurring. If the SEC was not aware, the U.S. Attorney's Office wasn't aware, the FBI wasn't aware, how would they become aware? On the issue of settling, and it cuts both ways. I mean, as a banking institution, you're entrusted with consumer confidence. If you settle, in your eyes as a lawyer, Greg, in my eyes, in David's eyes, a settlement, okay, we read it as one thing, but to public confidence, where there's smoke, there's fire. Are they settling because they were a part to this activity? And I don't think banking institutions are in the,
but you know what?
The business of investigating.
Yeah, but David, let me ask you about this, because this is right up your alley. I mean, Picard is suing under the racketeering statutes called RICO, originally intended for the mob, organized crime. You've handled RICO cases. This allows for triple damages, so-called treble damages. Won't that serve as a strong incentive for these banks to settle this case before trial, because they don't want to get hit with triple damages?
Yeah, and all you have to prove under a civil RICO suit, Greg, is 2 acts of wrongdoing in a 10-year span. And that can be money laundering, that can be fraud, that can be embezzlement. And if that's proven, like you said, it can be treble damages, 3 times the amount of damages, even punitive damages. And the banks may want to get rid of it because of that, but also because of the PR taint of being associated in any way, shape, or form with Madoff. That alone, I would think, would want them to quietly do a private settlement, terms undisclosed, and just Get rid of it.
Yeah, being in bed with Madoff is a bad thing in front of a jury. Joe, what about
Right.
that? I mean, hedge fund managers and other money managers funneled all this money into fraudulent ops. I mean, they've been sued. They claim they were duped, but that's going to be hard to convince a jury of, especially since one hedge fund analyst went through Madoff's performance and his operations and said, hey, this is statistically impossible. Right?
I'm with you, Greg. I mean, on this issue, I don't think that the jury is really going to be leaning towards the hedge funds. I think they're going to be leaning towards the investors here,
Right.
the investors who lost so much money. And this has to do a lot with sympathy. The sympathy is certainly not going to be on their side. I think it's going to be very difficult to establish that.
And those
case
defendants
in the jury.
know that
You know
in
what?
the jury room during deliberations, everybody goes, they're rich anyway, so let's bang them for some big bucks. Joey Jackson, David Wool, good to see you both.
Pleasure, Greg.
You bet, Greg.